The wind swept through the grassy expanse of Willow Creek Park in the small coastal town of Bayview, Washington, carrying the scent of salt from the nearby Puget Sound. Lora Bennett sat on her usual weathered bench beneath a towering cedar tree, her fingers tracing the frayed edge of the leash tethered to Scout, her German Shepherd guide dog. Scout's warm brown eyes scanned the park with quiet vigilance, his ears flicking at the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of a lawnmower. For Lora, who had lost her sight in a workplace accident 7 years ago, Scout was more than a companion. He was her anchor, her eyes, and her unwavering protector. The park, with its familiar sounds and smells, was her refuge, a place where she could breathe deeply and feel the world around her without fear. But today, Scout was on edge, his muscles taut, his gaze fixed on something Lora couldn't see. Across the park, near the gravel parking lot, Travis Kane leaned against his black pickup truck, his leather jacket creaking as he lit a cigarette. His shaved head gleamed under the late afternoon sun, and the tattoos snaking up his arms gave him an air of quiet menace. Surrounded by a small group of friends, all clad in denim and boots, Travis was the kind of man who thrived on attention. His eyes landed on Lora, sitting alone with Scout, her calm presence and the dog's disciplined posture sparking something in him, a need to disrupt the quiet scene. "Check out the lady with her fancy dog," he said, his voice laced with mockery as he flicked ash to the ground. His friends chuckled, egging him on. With a smirk, Travis pushed off the truck and sauntered toward Lora, his heavy boots crunching against the path. Scout sensed him first. The dog's ears shot up, his body stiffening as a low growl rumbled deep in his chest. Lora felt the tension through the leash, her heart quickening. She tilted her head toward the approaching footsteps, her senses sharpening. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steady despite the unease creeping up her spine. Travis stopped a few feet away, his grin widening. "Just admiring your dog, sweetheart," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Bet he's real well trained. Does he fetch? Roll over? Maybe beg for treats?" His friends laughed from a distance, their voices carrying across the park. Laura's grip on the leash tightened, her knuckles paling. "Leave us alone," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the air. She couldn't see Travis, but Scout's growl told her everything she needed to know. This man was trouble. Travis, undeterred, clapped his hands sharply, trying to rattle Scout. The dog didn't flinch, his piercing gaze locked on Travis, his growl deepening into something primal. "Oh, tough guy, huh?" Travis taunted, stepping closer. He raised his boot as if to nudge Scout, a reckless move meant to provoke. The park grew quiet, the air thick with tension as a few onlookers paused, their conversations fading. Laura's heart pounded. "Don't touch him," she warned, her voice sharp with fear and defiance. What Travis didn't know was that Scout wasn't just a guide dog. Before Lora, he had been a military K-9, trained to protect soldiers in combat zones, his instincts honed to neutralize threats with precision. As Travis's boot inched closer, Scout's training kicked in. His muscles coiled, his eyes narrowing to slits, and his growl erupted into a deep, menacing bark that echoed through the park. In a flash, Scout positioned himself between Lora and Travis, his teeth bared, his body radiating controlled power. This wasn't the reaction of a pet, it was the response of a warrior. Travis froze, his smirk faltering. The crowd, now growing, watched in stunned silence, some pulling out their phones to record. "What the hell?" Travis muttered, taking a half step back, his confidence shaken. Lora, clutching the leash, felt Scout's movement through the vibrations. "Scout, easy," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. The dog held his ground, his focus unwavering, ready to act if Travis made another move. A woman's voice broke the tension. "Someone needs to stop this," she called from the crowd, but no one stepped forward. The standoff stretched on, Travis's bravado crumbling under Scout's unrelenting stare. Just then, a park ranger, a stocky man named Carl Grayson, pushed through the onlookers, his radio crackling. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the scene. Travis raised his hands, trying to play it off. "Just messing around, man. The dog's overreacting." Carl's gaze shifted to Scout, then to Lora, who sat rigid on the bench. "Messing around?" he said, his voice hard. That's a guide dog and you're harassing a woman who can't see. You think that's a game? The crowd murmured, their disapproval growing louder. Scout's growl softened but didn't stop, his eyes still locked on Travis. Laura's voice cut through, steady despite her racing pulse. He's not just a guide dog. He's protecting me. Please, just make him leave. Carl stepped closer to Travis, his expression unyielding. You heard her? Move it, or I'm calling the police. Travis hesitated, his eyes darting between Scout's bared teeth and the ranger's stern face. The crowd's whispers turned into open criticism, and someone shouted, "Get out of here!" Finally, Travis backed off, muttering under his breath. Fine, I'm going. Crazy dog. He turned and stalked back to his truck, his friends following, their laughter replaced by uneasy silence. As Travis retreated, an older man in a faded navy cap stepped forward from the crowd, his weathered face etched with quiet authority. That's no ordinary dog, he said, his voice carrying over the murmurs. He pointed at Scout, who still stood guard. I've seen that stance before. That's a military K9, trained for combat, not just guiding. Laura's breath caught. She turned toward the man's voice, her mind racing. What do you mean, she asked, her fingers tightening around Scout's leash. He's my guide dog. The man, whose name was Walter, nodded slowly. He's that now, ma'am, but I'd wager he's seen action. That focus, that bark. It's not just instinct, it's training. He's a soldier. The revelation hit Laura like a tidal wave. She knelt beside Scout, her hands trembling as they brushed through his thick fur. Scout, she whispered, her voice thick with awe. She had always known he was special, but a military dog. The idea that he had a past filled with danger and heroism was almost too much to process. Walter continued, his tone reverent. Dogs like him are trained to protect, to take down threats. He saw that guy as a danger to you, and he reacted the way he was taught. You're lucky to have him. Laura's chest tightened, a mix of pride and disbelief swirling within her. The crowd began to disperse, but a few lingered, their eyes on Scout with newfound respect. Carl, the ranger, approached Laura. You okay, ma'am? He asked, his voice softer now. She nodded, her hand resting on Scout's head. I'm fine, thanks to him, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Scout leaned into her touch, his body relaxing, but his vigilance unbroken. As the park returned to its usual rhythm, Laura sat back on the bench, her mind reeling. Scout, a military dog. The words echoed in her thoughts, reshaping everything she thought she knew about him. She had trusted him for years, relied on his steady presence to navigate her darkened world. But now she saw him in a new light, a protector with a history she could only imagine. That evening, Laura sat in her modest apartment, the hum of the coastal town outside her window. Scout lay at her feet, his breathing steady, his warmth grounding her. The events of the park played over and over in her mind, Travis's aggression, Scout's fierce response, and Walter's words about his military past. She reached for her laptop, her fingers hesitating over the keys. She wasn't sure where to begin, but curiosity drove her to search for military K9 history. The articles she found painted a vivid picture. Military dogs like Scout were trained for high-stakes missions, detecting explosives, guarding bases, and protecting soldiers in war zones. They were disciplined, fearless, and fiercely loyal, often forming unbreakable bonds with their handlers. Laura's heart ached as she read about the dangers these dogs faced, the injuries they endured, and the lives they saved. She glanced at Scout, now dozing peacefully, and wondered what battles he had fought, what scars he carried beneath his sleek coat. Scout, she murmured, sliding to the floor beside him, what have you been through? He stirred at her voice, his eyes opening briefly before he nudged her hand with his muzzle. The gesture, so familiar yet now so profound, brought tears to her eyes. She had always seen him as her guide, her lifeline, but now she understood he was so much more, a hero who had chosen to stay by her side. The next morning, Laura decided to act. She called the Bayview Veterans Association, her voice steady as she explained the park incident and Walter's revelation. I need to know more about Scout's past, she said. He's not just my guide dog. He's something else. The woman on the line, Emily, was kind but cautious. Retired military K9s are often placed in new roles, like guiding or therapy, she explained. If you have his ID number, I can try to track down his records. It might take a few days. Lora provided the details from Scout's tags, her heart pounding with anticipation. As she hung up, she knelt beside him, stroking his fur. "We're going to find out who you are, Scout," she said softly. "You deserve that." Over the next few days, Lora couldn't shake the weight of what she'd learned. Every time Scout guided her through the streets of Bayview, his steps precise and confident, she wondered about the life he'd led before her. Had he patrolled dusty roads in a war zone? Had he saved lives? The thought of him facing danger stirred a mix of pride and protectiveness in her. She began paying closer attention to his behavior, how he stiffened at loud noises, how his ears perked at the sound of a motorcycle, how he always positioned himself between her and strangers. These weren't just quirks, they were remnants of a life she was only beginning to understand. One afternoon, as Lora and Scout walked through Willow Creek Park, she felt a tap on her shoulder. "Excuse me," a familiar voice said. It was Walter, the man from the park. "I've been thinking about you and your dog. Mind if I join you?" Lora smiled, grateful for his presence. "Of course," she said, gesturing to the bench. They sat together, Scout settling at Lora's feet, his eyes scanning the park as always. "I served in the Navy years ago," Walter began, his voice steady but tinged with nostalgia. "Worked with K-9 units in Vietnam. Dogs like yours, they were our lifeline. One saved my squad from an ambush once. Saw the same look in your Scout's eyes the other day. Pure focus, pure loyalty." Lora listened intently, her fingers resting on Scout's head. "I had no idea," she admitted. "He's been with me for years, but I never knew about his past until now." Walter nodded. "They don't forget their training. It's in their bones. But they also know when they found someone worth protecting. He chose you, Lora." The words hit her hard. She swallowed, her throat tight. "I want to do right by him," she said. "I want to know who he was before me." Walter's eyes softened. "You're already doing right by him. Just keep listening to him. He'll tell you what he needs." That evening, Lora received a call from Emily at the Veterans Association. "I found Scout's records," she said, her voice warm with excitement. "His military name was Valor. He served with a handler, Staff Sergeant Michael Reed, in Afghanistan. They were on multiple missions together, mostly explosive detection. Valor retired 5 years ago after Michael was injured in a blast. He was placed with you shortly after." Lora's heart raced. "Valor," she whispered, testing the name. It felt right, like a piece of a puzzle clicking into place. Is he okay?" "He's alive," Emily said. "Retired now, living in Idaho. I can give you his contact information if you like. He might want to know how Valor's doing." Lora jotted down the details, her hands shaking. When the call ended, she sat in silence, staring at Scout, Valor, lying at her feet. "You were a hero," she said softly, "and you still are." The decision to call Michael Reed wasn't easy. Lora spent the evening pacing her apartment, her mind racing with questions. What if Michael didn't want to talk? What if revisiting Valor's past brought up painful memories? But as she looked at Scout, his steady presence calming her nerves, she knew she had to try. She owed it to him to uncover his story, to honor the life he'd led. Taking a deep breath, she dialed the number. The line rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. "Hello? Hi, is this Michael Reed?" Lora's voice trembled slightly. "My name's Lora Bennett. I think I have your former K-9 Valor." There was a long pause and Lora's heart sank, fearing she'd overstepped. But then Michael's voice returned, thick with emotion. "Valor? You're serious? I never thought I'd hear about him again." Tears pricked Lora's eyes. "He's been my guide dog for years," she said. "I didn't know about his past until recently. He protected me from someone in the park. I'm starting to understand who he really is." Michael let out a shaky laugh. "That sounds like Valor. He saved my life more times than I can count. He was my partner, my best friend. When I got hurt, I couldn't keep him. Breaking that bond, it was the hardest thing I've ever done." Lora listened as Michael shared stories of their time together. Valor's courage under fire, his uncanny ability to sense danger, his quiet moments of companionship in the chaos of war. Each story deepened Lora's awe, but it also stirred a quiet sadness. Scout had carried so much, and she hadn't known. "I'd love to see him," Michael said, his voice breaking. "If that's okay with you." "Of course," Lora said without hesitation. "He's your family too." A week later, Lora stood outside her apartment, Scout's leash in her hand, as a car pulled up. She heard the door open, and Michael's voice called out. "Lora!" "That's me," she replied, her heart pounding. "And this is Scout, Valor." Michael approached slowly, his footsteps heavy. Lora could hear the emotion in his breathing as he knelt beside Scout. "Hey, buddy," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's me." Scout froze, his ears twitching. Lora felt the leash go taut, then slacken as Scout stepped forward, sniffing Michael's hand. A low whine escaped the dog, and his tail began to wag, a slow, deliberate motion that spoke of recognition. Michael laughed, a sound mixed with tears. "You remember me, don't you?" Lora's eyes welled up as she listened to the reunion. She could feel Scout's joy through the leash, a connection that transcended time and distance. They moved inside where Michael shared more stories. How Valor had once detected an IED just seconds before it would have detonated. How he'd stayed by Michael's side during a long recovery in a field hospital. Lora listened, her hand never leaving Scout's fur, marveling at the dog who had been her constant companion. As the visit drew to a close, Michael knelt beside Scout again. "You've got a good home now," he said, his voice thick. "I'm so glad you found someone who loves you like I did." He turned to Lora, his tone grateful. "Thank you for taking care of him." Lora smiled, tears streaming down her face. "He takes care of me," she said simply. After Michael left, Lora sat with Scout, her mind buzzing with everything she'd learned. He wasn't just her guide dog. He was a hero, a soldier, a survivor. But more than that, he was her partner, and she was his. The bond they shared was deeper than she'd ever imagined, forged not just by necessity, but by mutual trust and resilience. In the weeks that followed, Lora began to see Scout's daily routines in a new light. His alertness at loud noises, his habit of positioning himself between her and strangers. It wasn't just training, it was who he was. But she also noticed something else. Scout seemed content, even happy in their quiet life together. Still, a part of her wondered if he missed the intensity of his past, the purpose he'd once had. One morning, while reading about retired military dogs online, Lora stumbled across a program called Pause for Purpose, a local organization that offered activities for retired canines, tracking exercises, obstacle courses, and scent detection tasks designed to keep their skills sharp. The article explained that many retired service dogs struggled with the transition to civilian life, sometimes becoming restless without a sense of mission. Lora looked at Scout, sprawled across the living room floor, and wondered if he needed more than their daily walks and quiet evenings. She called the program that afternoon, explaining Scout's story. The coordinator, a woman named Rachel, was enthusiastic. "We'd love to have Valor join us," she said. "Dogs like him thrive when they get to use their training. Bring him by, and we'll see what he can do." The following Saturday, Lora and Scout arrived at the Pause for Purpose facility, a sprawling field just outside Bayview with agility courses and training areas. Scout's ears perked up the moment they stepped out of the car, his tail wagging with an excitement Lora hadn't seen before. Rachel greeted them, kneeling to meet Scout. "This must be Valor," she said, her voice warm. "Let's see what he's got." As Scout moved through the course, leaping over hurdles, navigating tunnels, and tracking scents with laser-like focus, Lora sat on a nearby bench, listening to Rachel's commentary. "He's incredible," Rachel said, her voice filled with awe. "His instincts are as sharp as ever. It's like he's been waiting for this." Lora's chest swelled with pride, but there was a bittersweet edge to it. Watching Scout come alive in this environment, she realized how much of himself he'd been holding back. He wasn't just a guide dog, he was a soldier who still craved a mission. When the session ended, Rachel approached, her face glowing. "Valor's one of the best I've seen," she said. "You should bring him back every week. It's good for him, and for you." Lora nodded, her throat tight. "I will," she said. "He deserves this." Over the next few months, Scout's weekly sessions at Pause for Purpose became a highlight for both of them. Lora loved hearing the trainers describe his progress, how he tackled each task with the same intensity he'd shown in the park that day with Travis. But more than that, She loved seeing him happy, his tail wagging as he bounded across the field, his eyes bright with purpose. One evening after a particularly successful session, Lora received another call from Michael. "I've been thinking about Valor," he said. "How's he doing?" Lora smiled, her hand resting on Scout's head. "He's thriving," she said. "He's still guiding me, but he's also back to being Valor, doing what he was trained for. It's like he's living two lives at once." Michael chuckled. "That's him, always ready for the next mission. But Lora, don't forget, you're his mission too. You give him a home, a reason to keep going." The words stayed with Lora long after the call ended. She looked at Scout, his steady presence filling the room, and felt a wave of gratitude. He had saved her in ways she couldn't fully articulate, not just from Travis, but from the isolation and fear that had defined her life after the accident. And in return, she was giving him a chance to be himself, to honor the hero he'd always been. One crisp autumn evening, Lora and Scout returned to Willow Creek Park, sitting on their familiar bench. The air was cool, the park quiet except for the rustle of leaves and the distant call of a gull. Lora let the leash rest loosely in her hand, feeling Scout's warmth beside her. "You've been through so much," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "But you're still here, still choosing me every day. I'll never stop being grateful for that." Scout nudged her hand, his muzzle warm against her palm. In that moment, Lora felt a profound sense of peace. Their bond was more than guide and handler, more than soldier and civilian. It was a partnership built on trust, resilience, and love. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, just as they always had. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the park, Lora made a silent vow. She would keep finding ways to honor Scout's past, to give him the purpose he deserved, while cherishing the life they shared. He wasn't just her hero, he was her family, and she was his. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe to see more stories like this.